The paycheck in front of him made his stomach drop. Ben Foster had built his company from the ground up. He started with one store, worked long hours, sacrificed weekends, and turned it into a thriving multi-location business. But over the years, the company had grown too big for him to keep his hands on everything. He had district managers, regional supervisors, and layers of leadership between him and the frontline employees. Lately, something felt off. Complaints about low morale, high turnover, and employees struggling to make ends meet had been trickling up to him. He had asked his executives for answers, but they assured him everything was fine. Ben didn't believe them. So, he decided to find out for himself. He changed his appearance, dyed his hair a dull brown, grew out some stubble, wore thick glasses, and dressed in cheap, wrinkled clothing. He gave himself a fake name, Mike Carter. Then, using a different email and phone number, he applied for a minimum wage position at one of his stores in a city where no one knew him. The hiring manager barely glanced at him before handing over some paperwork. No background check, no real interview, just a rushed, "You start Monday." That was red flag number 1. By his third day on the job, he was exhausted. The work wasn't complicated stocking shelves, running the register, cleaning up spills, but the pace was relentless. Employees were stretched thin, expected to do everything with barely enough time to breathe. Then came payday. His first check was laughable. After taxes, it wasn't even enough to cover rent in most places. He looked around at his coworkers, people with families, people who had been here for years. How were they surviving on this? Ben sat in the break room, staring at his check, when a voice pulled him out of his thoughts. "Feels like a slap in the face, huh?" He looked up to see Maria, a middle-aged woman who had been helping him learn the ropes. She had a warm but tired smile. He nodded. "I don't know how you do it." She chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "You learn to stretch every dollar. Rent went up again, so I'm picking up extra shifts. My son's college dreams? Gone. I just need to keep the lights on." Ben felt a knot in his stomach. How had he not realized it was this bad? But the worst was yet to come. That evening, after a grueling shift, he overheard 2 managers talking in the office. "They keep asking for raises," one scoffed, "like they deserve more than minimum wage." The other laughed. "If they don't like it, they can leave. There's always someone desperate enough to take their spot." Ben clenched his fists. He had heard enough. Ben forced himself to stay calm. He couldn't blow his cover yet, not until he fully understood how deep the problem ran. The next morning, he arrived early, blending in with the others as they clocked in. The store was already buzzing with tension. Employees moved quickly, heads down, afraid to make a mistake. And then there was Maria already there, already working, even before her shift officially started. "Morning, Mike," she greeted him with a tired smile. "Morning," he replied, watching as she rubbed her wrists. He noticed the swelling, the stiffness in her fingers. "You okay?" She waved him off. "Just arthritis. Comes with the years, I guess." Ben frowned. She had been lifting heavy boxes all day yesterday, barely stopping to rest. No one seemed to care. The day dragged on. He stocked shelves, rang up customers, cleaned spills. But what really struck him was the way management treated the workers. At noon, a young employee named Daniel, a college student working part-time, asked for a quick break to grab food. He had been working nonstop for 5 hours. The shift supervisor, a man named Greg, scoffed. "Break? You get those when I say you do. If you want to eat, do it after your shift." Daniel hesitated, his stomach growled, but he nodded and went back to work. Ben clenched his jaw. This wasn't leadership. This was control. Hours later, Maria pulled him aside. "You should probably keep your head down," she warned. "Why?" he asked, though he already had a feeling. She glanced toward Greg, who was berating a cashier for not upselling a customer. They don't like when new hires ask too many questions. If they think you're trouble, they'll cut your hours until you quit. Ben exhaled slowly. So that's how they did it. No outright firings, just silent pressure. Later that night, as he was sweeping near the back room, he overheard something that made his blood run cold. Greg and another manager, Lisa, were talking in low voices. Maria asked about her overtime pay again, Lisa muttered. Greg snorted. She's not getting it. We'll fix the system so it doesn't show up. She won't fight back, she needs this job too much. Ben gripped the broom so hard, his knuckles turned white. They were stealing from her. From all of them. This wasn't just bad management, this was exploitation. He took a deep breath. This couldn't wait. He had seen enough. It was time to act. Ben stood there, gripping the broom, his heart pounding in his chest. He had built this company, his company, and now, standing in the back of the store, dressed as a nobody, he realized it had become something he didn't even recognize. They were stealing from employees, mocking them, treating them like disposable tools instead of human beings. Enough. He took a slow breath, forcing himself to stay calm. If he lost control now, if he blew his cover too soon, he wouldn't get the full truth. He needed to see exactly how deep this rot had spread. So he waited. The next morning, he arrived early again. Maria was already there, rubbing her swollen wrists, forcing a smile through the pain. Daniel was moving sluggishly, exhaustion clear on his face. And Greg was barking orders, smirking, walking around like he owned the place. Ben watched, listened, took it all in. By midday, the moment finally came. Maria, hesitant but determined, approached Greg near the register. Hey, I checked my last paycheck. My overtime isn't on there again. Greg sighed dramatically, rolling his eyes. Maria, we've been through this. The system must have messed up. Again. But that's the third time, she said, voice shaking slightly. I worked those hours, Greg. I need that money. Greg leaned in, voice dropping low. Look, you're lucky we even keep you on. You're slow, you make mistakes. Maybe instead of complaining, you should be grateful you have a job at all. Ben saw it, the way Maria's eyes flickered with something like defeat. She wasn't just tired, she was broken. And that was it. Ben set down the box he was carrying, wiped his hands on his cheap uniform, and stepped forward. Actually, he said, his voice cutting through the tension, she's right, Greg. Greg turned, scowling. What? Ben took a step closer. Maria worked those hours, I saw her, and under federal labor laws, failing to pay overtime is wage theft, which means you are stealing from her. The room went silent. Maria's eyes widened. Daniel froze. Another cashier looked away, pretending not to listen. Greg's face twisted in amusement. Oh, look at you. Playing lawyer now, Mike? He laughed, shaking his head. Buddy, I don't know where you think you are, but this isn't your problem. Ben held Greg's gaze for a long second. Then, slowly, he reached up, pulled off his glasses, and ran a hand through his hair, wiping away the temporary dye. Greg's smirk faded. Maria took a sharp breath. Daniel blinked, confused. Ben crossed his arms. Oh, but it is my problem. A silence. Then Greg let out a dry laugh. What? What is this? You think taking off your glasses makes you scary? Ben sighed. No, Greg, I think being your boss does. Greg's face paled. What? Ben pulled his wallet from his pocket and tossed it onto the counter. His real ID, his real name. Ben Foster, CEO. Maria covered her mouth. Daniel took a step back. Greg looked like he was going to be sick. Ben leaned in just slightly. Now, let's talk about how you've been running my store. Greg stammered, Look, this is just a misunderstanding. Ben's voice was low, even, controlled, but the anger was there, simmering just beneath the surface. No, Greg, a misunderstanding is getting an order wrong. A misunderstanding is losing track of a schedule. What you've been doing, stealing wages, abusing employees, humiliating them, that's not a misunderstanding. That's a choice. Greg swallowed hard. I was just following procedures. Ben shook his head. No, you were following your own rules, and that ends today. He turned, addressing the employees now. From this moment forward, every single overtime hour you've worked will be accounted for and paid correctly. No one is working off the clock. No one is being threatened with reduced hours for speaking up. And if anyone has ever been mistreated by management, you come directly to me. Maria's eyes filled with tears. Daniel exhaled like he had been holding his breath for weeks. Greg opened his mouth again, but Ben wasn't finished. And as for you, Greg, he gave the man one last look. You're done here. Greg's face turned red. You can't just. Ben raised a hand. I can, and I just did. Security arrived within minutes. Greg was escorted out, sputtering, his protests drowned out by the quiet relief settling over the store. But Ben wasn't done. Not even close. Ben stood in the center of the store, the weight of what he had just done settling in. Greg was gone. The employees stood frozen, unsure of what would happen next. Maria wiped at her eyes, her hands still trembling. Daniel looked at Ben like he was seeing him for the first time. Then slowly, Maria whispered, Is this real? Ben gave her a small, firm nod. Yeah, it's real. A silence. Then, one by one, the employees started to react. A few exchanged glances, processing what had just happened. Others stood in quiet disbelief. Ben took a breath. There was still so much to fix. He turned back to the group. I know this is a shock. I know a lot of you don't trust me, and honestly, I don't blame you. He met their eyes, one by one. But I built this company with the belief that people matter. Somewhere along the way, that got lost, and I let it happen. Maria shook her head. It's not your fault, Mr. Foster. Ben let out a humorless chuckle. It is. I wasn't here. I trusted the wrong people, and because of that, you've all suffered. He exhaled, grounding himself. That changes now. He pulled out his phone and sent a message. Minutes later, the district manager arrived, looking frazzled, confused. Mr. Foster, what's going on? I just got a call that. Ben turned to face him, his expression unreadable. Sit. The man hesitated before obeying. Ben didn't waste time. I just spent the last week working in this store as a minimum wage employee. He let that sink in, and what I saw was unacceptable. The district manager swallowed. Sir, if there were issues, Ben cut him off. The wage theft, the intimidation, the way employees are treated like they're disposable. His voice was steady, but the anger was there, boiling just beneath the surface. And you, either you knew and ignored it or you didn't know at all, which means you weren't doing your job. The man paled. I didn't realize. Ben leaned forward, lowering his voice. Then you weren't looking. A silence. The district manager squirmed slightly. I can fix this, I can. Ben held up a hand. No, I'll fix this. He turned to the employees. Starting right now. He pulled up the company database on his phone. Effective immediately, all unpaid overtime will be corrected and paid in full. Any hours that were stolen will be reimbursed. A stunned gasp rippled through the group. Ben wasn't finished. Starting next month, wages for all hourly employees will increase by 20%. The gasps turned into murmurs. Daniel's eyes widened. Wait, seriously. Ben nodded, seriously. Maria's lips trembled. Mr. Foster, that's long overdue, he finished. The district manager shifted. Sir, that's going to cost. Ben turned to him, his eyes sharp. Do you think I care? The man shut his mouth. Ben took a breath. I'm not done. He looked at Maria. You've been here for how many years? Maria hesitated. 10 years. Ben nodded. And in those 10 years, you've worked harder than any manager I've seen. He pulled something from his pocket, a company card with his personal number. As of now, you're being promoted to store supervisor, a real leader, someone who actually cares about this team. Maria's hands shook as she took the card. Tears welled in her eyes. I don't know what to say. Ben smiled just a little. Say yes. She let out a choked laugh. Yes. The employees clapped. Not out of obligation, not because they had to, but because, for the first time in a long time, something was changing. Ben turned back to the district manager. There's going to be an audit of every store in this region. We're going to find out where else this is happening, and anyone involved in covering it up will be gone. The man nodded quickly, understood. Ben took a slow breath, looking around the store. It wasn't perfect. Not yet, but it was a start. He turned to the employees. I know words aren't enough, and I don't expect you to trust me overnight, but I promise you, this company is going to be something you can be proud to work for again. He paused, and I'll make sure of it. For the first time since he started this journey, he felt it. Hope. Real change. And he wasn't going to stop until every part of this company reflected what it was always supposed to be. A place where people mattered.